through their use. Instead, technological competence is associated with the technology's mainly masculine maintenance. So this difference here is between borrowing and owning users and designers. Women get to borrow, men get to own. Women get to use, men get to design. And this has a really rich history.
So we're on about listening, and what we think we have to start listening to is the counter-narrative. So yes, we're contradictions and listening to the stories that are different from the normal ones. And in work that we've done over several years now, working with girls in game clubs, what we've tried to do is to reverse the order of play, basically, to give girls a head start by putting them first. So even before we did game work, we did technology work, where we would start off training girls in how to use computers, and then the girls would train the boys. So when you do these things, as the girls skill up, what you find is that those purported differences between the way girls play and the way boys play drop out, and when girls develop expertise, they play very much like boys. So that means that gendered play, female play, is actually novice play. That's very important to me.
Yeah, and one explicit example of that in our own work is that, I mean, we've done interventionist work, so it means that when we go into schools and we create after-school game clubs or during-school game clubs, we invite people who want to participate, and we have like 80 boys, and we have 10 girls. So we have to intervene in that. We go to classrooms. We send people who are, you know, youngish and look like near peers who can go in and talk to the class and explicitly recruit girls to the clubs. And once they do that and they start playing, what's really interesting is that they become very vocal about their status as players and about their rights. And for us, it's listening to how their voices change over time. We listen to affect, to their use of game idioms as they pick them up, their progressive appropriation of a kind of technical register for playing, e.g. using the names of the characters, actually trash-talking each other, and they start speaking and acting like gamers. And that's very different than attributing girls' kind of novice play where they start out, and what's really interesting is they start out and they'll talk to each other a lot. Like, what are you doing? What's going on? And then as they go on to play, they focus more and more on the game, and then they stop talking, and then they start trash talking. I got you, I'm ahead. And they start trash talking one another. And that is very much how most of our boys come to play. They come with already prior skill.
So a really important point that we want to make about this not discovering the same thing again and again and again is that it's sort of like an operating principle. If you're not being surprised by the work that you're doing when you're studying gender gaming, if you're finding out the same thing that we found out time and time again, you're actually being complicit in the continuous reproduction of gender inequity. You have to actually create the conditions that will allow you to see those counter-narratives, to hear those different stories, and to see those people as being different kinds of players. And we just can't stress enough that we need to create surprising results, not say, now we're just seeing the same thing that we've seen for 20 years. That's ideological work. It's not good. For us, it's been really important to drawing on Bakhtin's notion of adversivity. Bakhtin is the guy who says when somebody asks who's speaking, the answer is always more than one person. All voices are intermandling. So when you get somebody saying something in an interview, that is not data, as we like to tell our graduate students. It doesn't become data until you actually interpret it. The way you interpret it is from the standpoint of adversivity. Who is speaking to whom under what conditions? So what was the prior speech act, and what is the expected, the anticipated response? That's what frames what is said. This is a beautiful thing that we got in an interview from a young man who just said, if a guy asks me if I play video games, I'll say yeah. If a woman asks me, I will say no, because she'll think I'm a social misfit. So you cannot trust what people say. It doesn't mean you have to think that they're lying. It means that you have to be a savvy researcher and situate that utterance in the context of prior and subsequent utterances in order to make sense of it. Oh, okay, general theory. Okay. Methodologically, we have a lot of complaints, as you can imagine. People, and a couple of complaints here I just want to reference. In our field, we're not talking about industry, we're talking about the academy. In our field, increasingly, our strongest, best funded, most eminent researchers are drawing their data from either self-report in anonymous surveys, so you don't know really who's talking, or from server-side data. In both cases, this is what's not feminist about this, the subjects have either no knowledge that their information is being used, or they have no opportunity to speak back and to clarify what's being said, or to contest the way it's interpreted. The way it's interpreted is the second problem. What these same eminent researchers do is what Dorothy Smith calls ideological theorizing. They draw on existing mainstream theoretical frameworks and then interpret this data, which no one can contest, from the standpoint of these theories. Well, nice. In feminist work, there's been an awful lot of criticism of Nancy Chodoro's gender role theory. But not in games research, we just pick that right up, apply it to the data, and then analyze the behavior of people who are now playing in worlds where gender is not fixed, where they're not necessarily playing either conventionally in role or even the sex that they occupy in real life. But there's no possibility of finding out anything interesting about gender in play as long as you use gender role theory, which normativizes everything. And what's kind of interesting and funky is that, that in that same work, the finding, using gender role theory, which I find absolutely mind-boggling, is that that finding is that, as a matter of fact, more players of online games are lesbians, which I'm not in disavowal mode here, just so we're clear. It's just that it's bad enough, you get hit on bad enough as a woman playing, but now these researchers are using gender role theory to understand lesbians? What is wrong with this picture? These are the people that don't fit into gender role theory. And to announce that if you're playing, you're more likely to be a lesbian. Well, you can just enjoy that one. I don't know if it makes you. Maybe you should play play more games?
Play more games. Jane McConnell.
Jane, yes. She should play more games, actually.
So, how does this, where do we go? And one of the last places we want to look is that Raewyn Connell has this really nice point that she makes in her book on gender and world perspective, which is really a nice primer on gender, FYI. And what she does is she actually goes through all the meta-analyses that have been done on psychological research and neuroscience research that was trying to find gender differences, both psychological and some brain-based. And what she argues is that gender difference research should actually be renamed gender similarity research. Yes, sex similarity research. You messed me up.
That's such
Thank you.
We'll get you every time.
The point here is that we are always going around looking for difference, and her point is that we need not do that anymore. That what we really are doing is we're finding more similarities than we are differences, and we should really give up this project. That we should stop doing sex-based difference analyses.
Yeah, it's like the Holy Grail. And you know, there just isn't one. Men and women are more similar in every respect, physically, logically, mentally, emotionally, than they are different. So let's stop hunting for this strange, non-existent thing and start looking at what's interesting, which is really the similarity.
Yeah, it's not none of this stupid planet shit like Mars and Venus. That it just doesn't work. So our first orientation to action is to read, including the voices of the past that can situate work within a landscape of scholarship that has histories. So there's a strategic element, we think, to denying the deep histories and the currency of feminist work today. We've read way too many papers where people have claimed that there is no work on such and such when there, in fact, is a lot of work on that. So our challenge to you is really a feminist principle that we build on the backs of the women who have come before. And if you don't do that, we argue that you are making them silent and that work disappear. So we see this as an act of complicity with patriarchy, denying women's intellectual history. So our charge to you and to ourselves is to seek out the work that has been done and to bring it to the surface again. Women have been doing work like this for generations and generations, and it can only endure if we keep it alive, build on it, and most importantly, actually reference it. We also want to challenge you to read differently, to find out things you don't know, and they're reading differently. It's upside down, but it's okay. To find out things that you don't know, that you didn't think before, and that's imperative to making change. And we just want to ask, when did it become bad taste to engage in critical intellectual discussions that question and challenge one another's work? And why is it we tend to cite just whomever is useful to us and move on, which we think just makes for a culture of civility that does harm rather than good work? And we want to bring good work back and really encourage you over the next couple days to comment on each other's work, to ask challenging questions. We don't have to see those as aggressive or as undermining. We can see them as supportive, as trying to support the work of one another.
Actually, I just want to say, as the most respectful kind of ways that we can engage with women, we're not students. We do know things. We need to be challenging one another so we can think better. Again, think back to this notion of contradiction. If I interrupt the way that you're thinking, it's a sign of respect, not any kind of undermining. If I don't say anything, it's just business as usual. That's what we want to say.
Yeah. So really what we want to do is build up a feminist canon in this field and blast people with it. And we think that this is a good canon to blast people with, just some stuff that we threw together there.
So, yes, taking those 4 cardinal orientations in our compass theme here, what we want to do with this conference is to use our mental mapping of the terrain to determine the ways in which we're going to design an activist project. And really that is the whole, in a sense, this whole thrust of these 2 days, is to try to find ways to support you in designing a proposal that you can then pitch for seed funding, which FiG will provide you with, so that you can build probably a small, locally based initiative, anything to do with gender and games that has a feminist set of aspirations. And we will be doing workshops, and we will be doing scaffolding and discussions, but that really is the kind of point of all of this, not just to go over this miserable terrain that makes one tear your hair out, but rather to find a way to mobilize these anxieties and contradictions and impediments into a very specific small project. And we have the funds to support those projects, so we want to help you design them to such a point that you can pitch for those kinds of design.
And our idea is then to collect them back and to invite folks back in Vancouver around this time next year to present the findings of those little small-scale seed-funded projects. And so it really is building a kind of active research agenda in this area, active/activist, because we very much want to infuse those research projects with an activist kind of element. So we just want to say that change happens in sort of strange places, and it can even happen in the games industry. This is just a neat little story about a 14-year-old girl who lobbied EA to include female hockey players in their NHL games. And it's just a drop in the bucket, but we wanted to mention that sometimes we feel paralyzed when there actually need not be that kind of paralytic non-engagement. That sometimes we can do a lot of good just with a little and one voice. Another example of change, this is Maria Claway. She's doing great work at Harvey Mudd. If you haven't heard of her, she's now the provost or something, and basically has moved their computer science department from containing about 50% female to about 60% by changing the curriculum.
And she's on a skateboard. We just
And
know
she
it's
is.
wrong about balance and age.
And the main thing here that we want to point out is that the gender gap in course grades in STEM